Hi team, welcome back to our Introduction to Chinese History Anchor Fact series of printables and mini lessons. We now turn to China's century of humiliation. We've seen China getting an earlier start than other cultures thanks to emperors Shun and Yu, who started the Xia dynasty circa 2200 BC. And we saw China grow under the teachings of Confucius into the Middle Kingdom, protected by a great wall, and happy to trade with the world as long as the money kept coming in. The voyage of Cheng He, circa 1405, shows us this version of China, which thought of itself as the Middle Kingdom, and had no particular desire to change the world, despite having the means to do so if it wanted. Last time, we saw this all fall apart in the First Opium War of 1839 to 42, when China was replaced as the Middle Kingdom by Great Britain. Don't forget, this timeline is part of our printables package that includes quizzes and activities that will help you learn the story and is provided with this entire lesson set on the Knowable World website. The First Opium War was only the first of a long series of humiliations that China suffered at the hands of outside powers. As the name First Opium War suggests, there was a second a few years later. The result was the same. China lost. France had joined Britain to bully China, and Germany and Russia were doing the same. Perhaps the worst part of the story for the Chinese is that their neighbor Japan was also bullying them. Japan was considered a lesser culture by China, but what the Chinese did not understand is that the Japanese had decided to accept Europe as the Middle Kingdom and learn from Europeans. This had begun with a cautious policy called Rangaku, which means European learning. The Japanese were interested in European science and technology. And then, when the American naval commander Commodore Perry arrived in Japan to tell the Japanese that globalization was happening whether they liked it or not, they decided to accelerate their learning. Japan began a rapid program of industrialization and westernization. Steam trains and steam ships became a regular feature of Japan, and telegraph lines were soon crisscrossing the country. Japan was growing fast. It was adopting the technology of the European world and becoming as powerful as a European country. Unfortunately, the other lesson that Japan learned from Europe was imperialism. The Japanese believed that the only way to be a powerful nation was to create an empire, and they set their sights on Korea. This led to a showdown between China and Japan. Japan wanted to take control of the country of Korea, their mutual neighbor. China wanted to resist such change, because it would be another humiliation, showing how weak China had become. Unfortunately for China, the Sino-Japanese War of 1894-5 showed exactly that. Japan easily defeated China, and Japan began to take over Korea. From there, Japan would begin to make preparations for World War II. This would be even worse for China. But before we turn to that story, we have to look at the effects of these humiliations on China. The benevolent despots of China had failed. And, as happened so often in Chinese history, the people rebelled in order to get change. The first such rebellion was an attempt to help the emperors. It was called the Boxer Rebellion. During the Boxer Rebellion, the people tried to take the matter into their own hands. A militia was formed that in the Western world was known as the Boxers. This is because they were skilled in Chinese martial arts, and back then, people in Europe and America did not know much about Asian martial arts. They did not know the difference between karate and kung fu. They just referred to these things as kinds of boxing. So the Boxers attacked the embassies of foreign countries, including the United States, starting a war. The hope of the Boxers was that the Chinese government would wake up and join them against the hated foreigners, that the government would be inspired by their example and start to do its proper job as a benevolent despot. But they did not get their wish. Instead, it was the foreign governments that quickly reacted. They formed an alliance and invaded China to help their own people. This included Americans. I bet that most Americans don't know this. China has never invaded America, but America has invaded China. American troops invaded China as part of the Boxer Rebellion to protect the American embassy. The Boxer Rebellion was a failure, and China was humiliated yet again. So the question began to be asked, what is to be done? How do we restore the Middle Kingdom? How do we stop China from being so weak? What if having an emperor, as we have always had, is not the right way to protect China? What if we had a modern government like the other nations of the world? What is to be done? That is the topic in our next lesson on the Chinese Revolution of 1911. See you then.